Hey there, and welcome back to Faith for Finances. My name is Sam Piercy, and I am your host. And I have the unique privilege of being a messenger of a really unique way of looking at finances. And in some ways, we're looking at it backwards and upside down. And there's an interesting thing about backwards and upside down, because if you try and write something simple like the word money, M-O-N-E-Y, backwards and upside down, the first thing that happens is you get your pen and you get yourself all kind of squiggled around and you're focusing on it. And maybe I'll encourage you to try it and then tell me what happens. Because if you turn your paper upside down, all of a sudden, everything becomes crystal clear. It's simple, but it's not easy because that's not how we've been taught. So we've been taught to look at money a certain way. We've been taught to actually look at money. We have been taught to walk by sight and not by faith. And of course, we all like to quote 2 Corinthians 5:7, that we walk by faith, not by sight. But is that really what we do when it comes to finances? So in today's show, I'm going to unpack some of this. And there's so much to it that I've got my papers, I've got notes, and I would say that there are years that we can spend. We're never going to get it right. So we have to start and just be open to the possibility that we can look at finances from a completely different perspective. That way would be up and not down. That way would be by faith, walking in what the Word of God says, not by what we see. Yeah, we know we log into the bank account and we obviously aren't able to spend what we don't have, but we have to know what we're going to spend in order to know how much we need in order to be able to do that. And that's an interesting concept because it's the difference between spend less than you earn or earn more than you spend. They both require systems and a system of intentional spending. In business, it's called a cash flow forecast, a cash flow model. In personal finance, we call it a budget. And that means money coming in and money going out the bottom. And hopefully you've got a positive number, and then with that positive number you go and you put it on deposit at the bank so that you can save it and they're going to grow it for you. But the reality is that maybe they're going to grow it, but it takes it out of the possibility of being able to spend it. And when you spend money, you actually bless other people, because you create a profit for a business, and that business then employs other people and they purchase goods and services, and there's a natural flow of increase. If you take something and you take it out of circulation, you put it on deposit so that the immediate income from it is going to the person who has it on deposit, the financial institution. And from that, they then create loans that then fuel spending. That process means that interest rates cause prices to go up. The whole world that we live in is a credit-based economy. It's called a fiat economy, and throughout all of human history, we've seen it before. But if we're thinking that we got to get out of debt, we got to get out of debt, we got to get out of debt, we're focusing on getting rid of something. We're not focusing on creating something. We're not focusing on what has God brought to us. What has He given us right here, right now, that He expects us to plant? Where's the field that He wants us to plant? What's the size of the field? What are the seeds? What's the size of the harvest that He wants to produce through our life? If all we see is I got to get a job so that I can get some money so that I can pay the bills, and then hopefully I can stop spending, cut back my spending so that I have enough money that I can then get rid of this horrible bad stuff that is causing bondage, then I can save more. Because if I don't save more, then I'm not going to have enough. It's the way we've been taught to go to school, to get a good education so that you have a good job. And when you have a good job, then you make more money and you can put more money on deposit so that you can then save more, and then you hopefully have enough that you don't run out when you go to spend it. In 1997, I first realized that this whole concept of saving and then consuming, saving and consuming wasn't sustainable, that it actually caused fear, doubt, scarcity, and uncertainty. And what we really need isn't the big pot of gold. We really don't need the savings, and that's not to say don't save. I mean, yes, we want to make sure that we have some set aside, but we're not necessarily setting it aside for an emergency, because that's negative. We set it aside for opportunities. We set it aside just like squirrels do. We get lots of examples in nature. But what do we need? We need money coming in today, tomorrow, this week, next month, next year. We don't need a whole big pot of gold. We need enough money to pay the bills. And in order to do that, we need systems in place to manage the flow of money, first of all, to be earned, and then to come in, and then to go out. And all of that becomes very intentional. It's orderly and it's harmonious. There's a big difference between, okay, well, I got a mortgage over here, so I got to have a bank account over here, and oh, I get points on this credit card over here, so I'll put this money onto this credit card. That's just chaotic. And then we're always trying to squeeze. So there's 4 foundational concepts that reframe money. And we all know that in the Bible, God says, give, and it will be given unto you. We know about sowing and reaping. Do we also know about lending versus borrowing? And do we put God first and then money? Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added unto you. What does that really look like? Because we all know that money is the currency. That's where the food comes from for the table. That's where the roof over our head comes from. We know that. But do we trust that God also knows that? Because money doesn't grow on trees, and yet we talk about planting a garden. So that means that God's given us a seed. So there's 4 concepts that we talk about. Typically, we talk about tithing and giving in the church and this whole donor model. But if we're still coming at it from, you've got a fixed amount of money and now you have to get as much money, squeeze as much money out of it as you possibly can, that's very different than, this cause really speaks to me and I'm really passionate about this. I could spend all day and all night and not eat and just carry on and doing this all the time because this is really fun. So how, Lord, Lord, what have you given me? Who have you connected me to? What do I need to do in order to be able to produce a harvest from that? How is that going to work? Those kinds of questions are very different. What do you have in your hand right now? I've had people say, well, what do you do if you don't have any opportunities? It was like, what do you mean? Do you know anybody? Do you have God? Ask Him, what are the opportunities? He'll tell you. Well, I don't have any education. I can't do this and I can't do that. Well, can't. Forget that. What can you do? What can you do with what you have? Means, okay, what is the cost of your lifestyle? Before you actually go out and get an income, what is the house you're living in? The car you're driving, the people you're hanging out with, what is the entertainment? What are the causes that you're supporting? What are the activities that your kids are doing? Like, what are you doing with your life? And how much does that cost? If you're going to work so that then you can go do these things, okay, fair enough. Where's the money going to come from? What's the cost? If you want to travel around the world in a motorhome, fine. What are you going to be doing? How much does it cost to buy a motorhome and to run a motorhome and to park a motorhome? Figure these things out. That's walking by faith, because it requires you to say, wow, Lord, what do you want me to do? How much is it going to cost? And that to not just put it in a big long list where you run out the bottom, but to put it into something that says, okay, it's going to cost this, I need this much money, but egads, I only have this much money. So now what are we going to do? Figure out the difference and go, what's the gap? Okay, what do we have? That's the size of your field. That's the size of the harvest. So 4 concepts that kind of flip things upside down. The big one, of course, is always looking up, not down. You know, sometimes you need to be intentional for sure. I'm not talking about just spending what you don't have. That doesn't work for very long. We're talking about being sustainable. But earning more than you spend is very, very different than I've got this much, now I've got to squeeze. You still need to know how much you're going to spend. You still need to know when you're going to spend. You still need to have your systems in place. It has to be intentional. But what you're going to spend is the concept that governments and corporations use for planning. It's planned expenditures, and a program for financing them is actually the Webster's definition of a budget. Instead of planning for retirement, what we want to look at, and we'll unpack in the weeks ahead, is why saving money is really not your secret to retirement. Why the whole concept of get out of debt, get out of debt, get out of debt will keep you broke. How spending money will actually build wealth. And how a small seed of a $10 investment can produce unlimited income. And people go, well, it's only $10, it's not going to do anything. Well, yeah, but multiplying. How you do anything is how you do everything. And so if you don't value $10 and you haven't learned how to brainstorm what you can do with $10 to get a 100-fold return on $10, then what's going to happen when you're looking for 10 million? Will you ever be looking for 10 million because you're stuck at $10? Or if God gives you a $10 million dream, a $10 million vision, are you going to know where to start? Those kinds of questions are important because He gives each of us the ability to do something. So as we unpack this, I'm really encouraging you to make sure you go to MoneyMinding.com, sign up, get the free resources, ebooks, there's the templates and the 12 steps that we'll explore next week. The 12 steps, the 12 decisions. There's how do we start to do this? Because everybody wants to know, well, how do you do it? How do you do it? How do you do it? Well, how you do it starts with what are you doing? Who do you know? Because you've got to be able to start asking some different questions. How do we look up instead of down? If you want to buy a car, do you start with what you have? Do you start with, okay, well, I'll just get a cheap car because that's all I can afford? Or do you take cash flow to purchase an asset, which then produces more cash flow, and then you use that cash flow in order to finance something? People go, oh, that sounds complicated, that sounds risky, that sounds whatever. Well, is that more risky because you don't, is it risky because you don't understand? Or is it risky because you have heard all the years of your life that borrowing money is bad? Well, is it borrowing or are you leveraging? Are you taking a seed? The parable of the talents and the parable of the minas they start with the master gave the servants something and said, go produce wealth with them. Go do something. If you use debt to create bondage where you have to go work for it, that's very different than leveraging. Now, am I advocating debt? Absolutely not. It's a mindset. I'm not saying that we have to use those things, but it's how we think about it. We have to start thinking upside down. What do we have that we can plant in order to produce an immediate harvest, an immediate income that will then give us some fruit, give us some to share, give us something to replant so that we can continue to grow the harvest and we can have a celebration and we have more to give. Because if we're looking at how do we increase our resources, that is a radical concept. Because we haven't been taught how to do that. We've been taught how to manage money. We've been taught how to direct our attention to managing money, not managing our relationship with God, our relationship with each other, not our relationship with what's around us. What is in your heart? What do you love to do? Who is important to you? What are the causes that you just, it just rips your heart out because you want to do something and you don't know how. And $20 doesn't seem like enough. But 20 million maybe isn't even enough. But you just want to do something, but you got to go to work. But maybe there's something in that. Maybe there is something that you can do. And all of that starts because we are just open to the possibilities. We're open to the possibility that we can bring Jesus right into the money conversation, and He's going to lead us to other people that are going to, yeah, that cause really speaks to me too. What can we do? What can we do? How can we get this message out that something needs to change? And really that's what my team and I are doing, is we're saying, hey, enough is enough is enough. We know that everybody needs money. But if we go looking for money and we keep trying to do it on our own, the one message about working in community that's really interesting is the number of people that say, okay, if it works for me, then I'll share it with other people. Well, the point is, no, it says the community prospers, so do you. That means that we start in community. We start by having these conversations. We start by looking at the way we've always done it. Get out of debt means that you focus on something that brings in guilt and condemnation and shame, and it forces you to try and cut back and squeeze. And when you do that, then you don't want to spend, and then you open the door to more guilt. You open the door to resentment and to bitterness. You open the door to selfishness, because spending money is an expression of overflow to bless other people. If you're going to spend $10 at a coffee shop, that $10 blesses that employer. That employer then provides work for somebody else. And then they have $10 that they can spend somewhere else. And there's this multiplication effect. But if you're always saying, no, that's fluff, you don't need that. That's discretional, that's extra stuff. I mean, yes, maybe there are some things that aren't necessary. But that's between you and God. There's no guilt in any of that. God will tell you. He'll speak to your spirit and say, you know what, maybe you can wait. Or maybe something really, really is important to you. I don't know, a new pair of shoes, a really nice pair of shoes, like a couple $100 pair of shoes. And you don't have a couple $100 right now. That's okay, because you can set the intention and then you can say, okay, what am I going to do to get there? What activities can I do? And then you got to go, well, I have no idea. Great, join us. Because we have a whole growing group of people that are going to say, hey, what about this? What about that? We're going to actually teach you how to start thinking to bring the Holy Spirit, that creative power of the Holy Spirit that lives within us, that created the heavens and the earth, to help unlock ideas. And we're going to start small. How you do anything is how you do everything. We'll start with $10. If you can come up with 10 ways to produce $10, then you can come up with 10 ways to produce 10 million bucks. And if you don't even want to think that way, or somehow you think that, oh, that's too much money, well, that's fine. We're not saying you have to become a multimillionaire. God gave each of us unique plans and purposes and desires, and He doesn't expect all of us to go out, travel the world, and become multi-gazillionaires running big corporations. He expects some people that have a great desire to stay home and be a stay-at-home mom. You know, the reality is that many people actually need an extra couple $100 a month. So where's a couple $100 going to come from? Sadly, too many people think they have to go get another job. And if they have to get another job, then they start to think, well, I don't want to spend the time. I want more time with my kids. And it just becomes this can't. And it really does open the door to bitterness, because there's a desire that's not being fulfilled. And then you get numbness, and then you get tuning out. I just need to zone out. I'll just turn on the TV, or I'll get on my social media. Social media is a really powerful tool, but not when you do it at the expense of trying to numb a stressful day or numb a desire. Because at the core of that, then that leads to masking true purposes. What is God's purpose for your life? And then you get drugs, alcohol, sex. You get all these other things that are they're ways to mask a hurt. And at the root of systemic poverty is the lack of freedom. So let's look at an example. And this is a real life example, because typically when you get older, you start to, okay, well, I just want to downsize my home and live off my assets, but that's not God's plan. So here's an example. Somebody in their 70s had a $10,000 investment inside their retirement savings plan. And so they asked the simple question, well, what do I do with this? What do most people do if they've got $10,000 and they don't really need the income? Spend it. Okay? You pull it out, and in Canada that means that you're pulling out and you're getting about half of it. Well, what if the desire of this 70-year-old was to leave something for their grandkids? Okay, well, how can we increase that 10,000? Typically, that would mean, well, let's get a higher return. Let's get a higher return, but that's not what this guy was all about. So what we did was we actually drew it out, used the income in order to leverage credit, ended up with $30,000 in 7 years. We leveraged a $30,000 investment. So we took $10,000, turned it into $30,000, and 3 equity, whole life, permanent life insurance policies for the 3 grandkids. They were cheap, inexpensive to purchase at the time, and whatever, we can talk about more insurance later, but one $10,000 investment meant that there was $10,000 in savings at the end of 7 years for each of for those grandkids. Through those insurance policies, those kids were guaranteed to be insurable, and there was $30,000, and we did that in 7 years by shuffling things about. We looked up, not down. What can we do to take this asset and use it to produce income, immediate income, and then how do we use that income to fulfill that purpose? If you hear something and it just kind of goes, oh, that's a little bit different, then I encourage you to open your eyes, open your heart, open your mind, and to look further. Because that little bit of, I've never heard this before, or, oh, I never thought about it like that, is drawing you in. It's God saying, hey, I'm here. Let's see what the next step is. Let's see what we can do. Don't turn away because it's maybe a little bit different. Don't go, oh, that'll never work. Because as soon as you shut it down and you say can't, then that's exactly what you're going to get. Press in, press in, press in, and listen to what God's calling you to. And so we look to God, the author and the finisher of our faith. And we say, Lord, show us how. When we don't know how, lead me to somebody that can help me get the knowledge, lead me to the right kind of questions, lead me in the way of truth, lead me so that I can take that next step. It doesn't need to be towards $1 million. Maybe it's towards $10. Lead me in the way of increase, not decrease. And so make sure you follow us on Facebook, on YouTube. faithforfinances.com is where you'll get show information. You can connect with the team, and MoneyMinding.com is where you can get access to free resources and to join the community. Share the message. Just invite other people in, because as the community prospers, so do you.